Hello guys, and welcome back to HTW Gaming, and what is probably going to be the final commander guide from me, at least for the current iteration of Rise to War, before PBE and Rise to War 2.0 come into play. And so I thought I'd just do something different and pick a commander which is, fairly rarely used, though I have seen it used to great effect in the past. And that commander is going to be Saruman. Now, if you enjoy Saruman, or if you get any good information from this video from me, please consider hitting the like button or hitting subscribe. I'd massively appreciate it. Now, into the video. Now, in my opinion, Saruman is one of the least used of the tier 3 commanders, which is fairly unsurprising given how strong the pool of evil tier 3 commanders are when you consider Witch King, Sunind, Sauron, even commanders like Undying are very, very strong, so it's not surprising that he doesn't see a massive amount of play. However, in my opinion, having a lesser used tier 3 commander can at times play into your hands and give you a good advantage, as it's rare that the enemies are ready for him, and he definitely offers a different threat to other tier 3s. So if you're looking to kind of switch up your lineup a little bit, definitely consider giving Saruman a try. He can take somewhat significant investment, however, when you do get him to a certain level, he can become an extremely strong evil side commander, and at mid-respect, he can get fantastic results even against mega-whaled good side commanders. Against good side, he is one of the best tier 3 commanders around. Now you can see I've summarised some of the strengths and weaknesses, but I'll cover that a little bit more later on. So first up, if we look at kind of which purple gear I would recommend for him, if you're looking to build him, without flawless gear. So if you're looking into Exquisite, I definitely recommend running the Uruk-hai broadsword with Orc Strength. The reason for this is that we're going to be using primarily Reapers for the damage if you're using Exquisite gear. Now, the troop build is going to change depending on whether you use the Exquisite or the Flawless gear builds, as it does change up massively the capabilities of Sauron. But if you're using Exquisite gear, you want to be using Reapers for the damage, so therefore our gear is going to focus on buffing those Orcs as much as possible. And an Orc Strength Uruk-hai broadsword is fantastic for that, as it gives those Orc units plus 3 HP, and also up to, I think it's plus 9% damage as well, through the Orc Strength buff. If you don't have this, a Cutlass with melee might will work fantastically well as well, as it will grant plus 3 attack to those Reapers as well as plus 9% damage to all melee units. For chest protection, Goblin armor with Orc Vigor, similar reasoning to the Uruk-hai broadsword, we're looking for that reduced damage taken by Orc units, so that those Reapers take significantly less damage, and that also provides a defense buff as well. But if you don't have that available, a Scale Mail with Melee Vigor will also do very, very well. And if you do come up against evil, running a Superior Hauberk with Fire Protection will do very well to help against those Witch Kings with Alchemists. If you're running Saruman in non-role play, the Hauberk is probably the preferential solution, as you do see a lot of Alchemists on commanders like Gandalf the Grey as well. Particularly in King of Men, where that kind of Swans, Alchemists and War Drummers are kind of the meta build. So I'd probably recommend using the Hauberk in non-roleplay. For the headgear, you're mainly looking for survivability on your units, so we're going to use the Bone Mask, as that provides a great plus 3 HP. And then if you want to use Hysteria or Manipulate, both are very, very effective. Hysteria, of course, provides that extra little hit of madness, which can help, though it is a little bit RNG based, and Manipulate can reduce that damage from opponents. As for the accessory you want to go for, I like the Worn Out Smoking Pipe with Sustain, as this can add a little bit of bonus healing, but also can increase Saruman's focus for where his skills scale with focus. But the Drums of Moria with Bane of Dwarves will also do well for increasing that plus 3 attack on the Reapers to give them bonus damage, and Bane of Dwarves is good for if you come up against Dwarf commanders, which is very meta at the minute. I'm thinking a lot of Danes and Dwalins. Bane of Dwarves will help you improve your matchup against those even further. When using Exquisite, the primary damage dealer, of course, as I've said, will be the Reaper. So the gear is just designed to maximise the damage they can deal whilst also reducing the amount of damage they take and providing as much crowd control and healing as possible to make sure those Reapers survive as long as possible, so you get the maximum bonus from that damage dealing skill that the Reapers have, but also so that you get them also with the bonus of the Phantasm skill given by Saruman, which I'll cover a little bit later on. Now for the flawless gear, you have quite a few options here. Weapon wise, I very much like, if you could afford it, that is, the Dark Staff of Power, which is his unique Respect 10 item. Though I appreciate that not everyone can afford to spend this much on gold mithril at the moment, and also with gold mithril being so valuable, with other commanders having brilliant Respect 10 items, thinking like Sunind for example. If you don't want to spend that much on his Respect 10 item, you do have other options. The Gigantic Hammer, of course, will always be, in its current condition, the meta option, with that +6 attack providing an awesome damage boost, and also Rend for the effect is very good on Saruman, as it allows you to ignore some of the opponent's defense. Another option which I haven't got on here as well, which is brilliant actually, and probably should be down as the second best option, is the Cruel Hooks. Now the Cruel Hooks with Might of Soldiers is brilliant, as it gives a huge damage buff to the Berserker unit. It gives I think it's +6 attack to the Berserker unit, plus an additional +3 attack to all your melee units at the cost of some HP. But you also get with Might of Soldiers up to +12% damage buff as well for all of your melee units. With the Exquisite gear, I mentioned that the Reaper was going to be your primary damage unit. With Flawless gear, your primary damage unit is going to be the Berserker. So using these Cruel Hooks or the Gigantic Hammer, as I've said, will do absolutely magnificently. So basically you just want to try and get those Berserkers' attack as high as possible. For chest gear, there's only one real really good choice with Flawless gear, and that is the Mithril Coat with Tactical Maneuvers. That's because this Mithril Coat has brilliant bonus defense, and Tactical Maneuvers, reducing that damage received in the first few rounds, is a fantastic ability on its own, but it also synergizes very well with Saruman, whose Phantasm skill ups the damage of your units the further you get into the later rounds. So having something reduces damage received in the early rounds, where normally those are kind of the most important rounds, you just want to survive them without losing too many units. So having something that reduces that damage synergizes brilliantly well. Headgear, you have a couple of different options. You could use the Chieftain's Gaze, you can also use the Berserker's Gaze, or the Cask of Pride. Now all of these have their kind of ups and downs. The Chieftain's Gaze and the Berserker's Gaze are particularly great because they synergize so well with Uruk-hai units and Berserkers in particular. The Curse skill is absolutely magnificent. It synergizes so well, similar to Tactical Maneuvers, reducing that early damage taken from the opponent's units in the first couple of rounds. I think it's the first 2 rounds with Curse. But Uruk-hai Command also with the Chieftain's Gaze can be very good if you instead want to increase your own damage, particularly from the Berserkers, in those first 2 rounds. So as Uruk-hai Command's damage kind of drops off, that's when you start getting Saruman's later round damage buffs coming in, so that can do very well. But if you have neither of these available, or you want kind of a more standard kind of transferable item that you could use on other commanders as well, the Cask of Pride with melee suppression will also do well, just to reduce damage you receive from enemy melee units and give more defense, so more survivability to your units. As for accessory, the Palantir of Orthanc is the standout here, mainly for its bonus +3 attack for more damage from your units as well. And then you have the choice of Tactical Mark if you want to deal better against evasion commanders like Gil-galad or Gandalf the Grey, which are kind of fairly heavily used in the meta. But if you'd rather just flatly increase your damage, Might of Soldiers will do brilliantly here as well. So either of these can do very, very well. Now, as I said, we're going to switch up the troop composition, so the Berserkers become the primary damage unit. Saruman's unique gives them a huge attack boost, same as the Gigantic Hammer and also same as the Cruel Hooks, if you can push Saruman's focus very, very high, the additional unrestrained power activations of many colours will give Saruman great elemental commander damage as well. So that bonus focus from the Mithril Vest in particular will be hugely useful. So yeah, the Flawless gear is a massive upgrade on the Exquisite counterpart, and you'll have to make a decision basically. If you're using half-half between the two, you'll have to make a decision as to whether you've given enough of a buff to your Berserkers to make it worthwhile switching away from the Reapers and into Berserkers. So as I said, there's quite a few troops here that synergise well kind of with Saruman. The Reaper is going to be the Exquisite gear's primary damage unit. You have excellent synergy between the Reaper's execution ability, which increases its damage in the later rounds, and Saruman's fanaticism skill, which increases damage each round. So they synergise well, meaning at late rounds you deal enormous amounts of damage. Then we have the Berserker. This synergises in a slightly different way. They have huge amounts of early round damage boosts, but that decreases over time. But that's exactly the same time as the fanaticism skill comes in, increasing their damage. So the two kind of net off. As one decreases, the other increases. So basically you're left with a very high damage dealing unit throughout all 10 rounds of battle. So this kind of counteracts it through the whole way through and makes them very, very strong units. And also having an immunity to stun can be very valuable as well. So the only thing that can really inflict you here and hurt you is madness. Next up we have the War Drummer. Now the War Drummer is a very good unit kind of in any composition. The ability to increase your own unit's damage, particularly when you have a very high damage unit, is fantastic. And again, the ability to remove a debuff so you're less you're less at risk from things like madness is absolutely fantastic. We also have the Alchemist as well. This benefits from a lot of the Urukai buffs, which are primarily focused towards buffing those Berserkers, but the Alchemist will also similarly buff from a lot of those, and it just adds a little bit of bonus elemental damage if you're looking for something different. There's the Sniper unit as well, which I haven't mentioned yet so far. If you want something a little bit different to the Reapers or the Berserkers, you can actually chuck in Snipers as well if you're using a lot of the Urukai focused gear. The Snipers will deal less damage than the Berserkers in the Flawless build. However, it massively improves your matchup with Sunind and other ranged commanders. Also does very well against Gil-galads, for example, in if you're playing roleplay against good side. So yeah, the Sniper can be a very good choice as well, as of course the Sniper will target enemy ranged units and deal massively increased damage. So this can be a choice as well, though it's kind of a bit more selective. You have to know which opponent you're going to come up against, because if you come up against a melee opponent, the Snipers will not do well at all. And then you have the Swan Knight and the Mountain Troll as well. The Swan Knight's taunt and defensive buff is primarily just to keep your other units alive, so again keeping those Berserkers alive for as long as possible so they can deal the maximum amount of damage, and so that fanaticism skill can come into play, similar to the Mountain Troll, which is a little bit less effective, but if you're playing evil side roleplay, it's kind of the only alternate option to the Swan Knight. Now into the skill build. So you'll see in the image here we do have the skill build for Saruman. The one thing to notice is the skill point allocation order. If you're putting points into these skills, you need to put them in this order. The primary reason for that is you need to get points into Soul Siphon before the other damage skills, so that the healing comes into effect before the damage, as the healing will increase the amount of command that you have available to you, which increases the amount of damage being dealt by the commander, basically. And you want any damage skills to come into effect before Palantir Scryer also, as Palantir Scryer could risk putting madness and therefore attacking your own army, and you don't want to attack your own army with one of your damage skills, so this one has to be in last. And you can see if you do have higher than Respect 5, spare points should firstly go into Soul Siphon, then Trembling Strike, just the 1 point, then go into Morgul Commander, Astonish, Wild Magic, and finally of many colours, and finish off Trembling Strike with as many points as possible, though I doubt many of you have a Respect 25 Saruman available. Credit here to Gore for this screenshot and skill build. If you're not already a member of his Discord, there is a link in the description below. He does have commander builds and troop recommendations for every single commander in the game, and so he has a very good Discord. So definitely check him out. So the point of these skills is to basically provide the maximum troop damage buff for your Reapers or Berserkers, depending on what build you've gone for. Fanaticism and Sharky together increase the damage massively, with Sharky providing that kind of flat damage buff, and Fanaticism increasing the damage buff as the rounds go on. Whilst Voice of Saruman provides some very useful crowd control, by inflicting madness on the enemy. Lastly, the 1 point in focus discharge can help against damage commanders like Dwalin or Dane by reducing their damage in round 6, which is when that kind of all-in and whirlwind high damage strike comes in. And if you can reduce that damage, it makes a massive difference. And because of that, Saruman's actually one of the best commanders up against the Dwarven commanders like Dwalin and Dane. He does perform surprisingly well, and I definitely encourage you to give him a try. It is quite a sight to behold. A lot of people use Grima, for example. Saruman has a very similar effect. There is some RNG included in this build, and there always will be, due to the 15% chance of madness being inflicted from Palantir Scryer, which then, of course, after that 15%, you do then have a 50-50 of attacking yourself, so realistically it's only actually 7.5%, but when that does happen, of course, you do lose some damage and inflict some damage on your own army, which can be unfortunate. Troop builds, of course, as I mentioned, they do differ. For the Flawless build, we're going to go with 4,000 Reapers as our primary damage unit. We're also going to include 2,000 Berserkers just for that early round damage, and then we're going to cover that with preferably a kind of taunting unit, so 750 Swans or 60 Trolls. However, you can also go for 1,500 Drummers if you want to go maximum damage to give that kind of damage buff from the Drummer's skills. For the Exquisite build, we're going to go full focus on those Berserkers, so we want 5,000 Berserkers, an enormous number, but they do deal fantastic damage with this build. We're going to go with the 1,500 War Drummers. As I previously said, they do give that damage buff, so again, maximum damage, and then a small number of Swan Knights or Mountain Trolls just to keep them alive over the first few rounds. A couple of battle reports in here, just showing how good a Saruman could be. Shout out and credit here also to Batu, who's a player for IRSS, who I've been in talks with quite a lot. He uses Saruman to fantastic effect. His Saruman's very strong, and something I've struggled with myself, and he did contribute a huge amount of information also to this build guide, so shout out to him. But you can see here that he comes up against quite a few very strong commanders here. We do have, for example, a Frenzied Dwalin, we do have a fully refined Cleave Aragorn King of Men, and also a Gandalf the White using Unique, and in all of them Saruman comes out massively on top. Similarly using the build that I mentioned earlier, Berserkers primarily, and the amount of damage being dealt by those Berserkers is absolutely enormous as the only damage dealing unit. And you can see against good side, he does come out fantastically well. I would say against evil side, he doesn't do quite as well, so definitely you're going to have to pick and choose your battles here. But if you can do that successfully, you will get fantastic results with Saruman. Kind of carrying on from that, you will see here that so kind of good matchups are most good side commanders, depending on your respect level, of course. If you can get his respect high, so you can get more points into those skills that counteract commander damage commanders like Aragorn King of Men, Dwalin or Dane, he becomes possibly the best commander to take on those, even better than Grima, though of course it's easier to get high respect into a Grima. But even before that, Focus Discharge massively reduces the amount of damage that they get from their highest damage rounds, so you will still perform very well. The kind of exception here for how well he performs against good side commanders are those that can perform an enormous amount of early round damage, as of course that can reduce the amount of command of troops that he has left, Saruman has left, as Fanaticism increases their damage in the later rounds. So if you can reduce the amount of troops early, you will massively counteract that kind of ability. So someone like Elrond can do very well against Saruman. Commanders without focus protection he'll do well against as well. He deals good amount of focus damage, which is useful in a meta that primarily prioritizes burn resistance. So if they're not running a quilted armor, you can do very well. This is particularly key if you're running Saruman's unique, as that does deal, again, that increases the amount of focus damage that he deals. And from evil side, you can get good results against Sauron, and it's kind of similar reason to the first point, is that he does do good damage reduction for commander damage. If you're running focus protection armor and madness protection, you basically completely nullify Saruman's abilities. Problematic matchups include elemental damage. He has a lack of protective skills like High Alert to reduce elemental damage before fanaticism can take full effect. So if you come up against something like a Witch King, you will likely get zeroed very, very quickly, as that lack of burn resistance will mean you take massive damage and you're not able to let fanaticism take effect to deal your own high amounts of damage. As I said about Elrond, early round damage can be a problem. Similarly, losing units before fanaticism can give you the damage advantage. So that's why Witch King is so good, as he deals elemental damage and early round damage. So he's a particular matchup to avoid. Similarly, Sanind can be a problem as well. Madness protection. So Voice of Saruman is a very strong madness skill affecting all opposing units. If they have madness protection, it basically means you've wasted these skill points, and madness affecting all opponents' units almost means that you're guaranteed to have at least one friendly fire strike in the opponent's side every single round. If they have madness protection, you lose that, you'll be taking a huge amount more damage whilst they'll be dealing a lot more. So that is definitely a weakness of Saruman. Focus protection, whilst this isn't the biggest deal in the world, it does reduce that amount of damage being dealt by Saruman himself. So focus protection does slightly nullify some of his effectiveness. And lastly, healing block also, whilst not as good of a counter as the madness protection, elemental or early round damage, similar to focus protection, it's a little bit of a counter, as it stops Soul Siphon from healing, and Saruman can do a good amount of healing, so it does make a difference. And with that, to kind of finally summarise Saruman back to the page you saw at the beginning, you can see here his strengths and weaknesses, which I think I've explained through pretty well. Hopefully you've enjoyed this guide. I think Saruman's a commander who's criminally underutilised, and I love to see when he's out there and how well he does perform. If you're considering giving this a go, please give me a shout out in the comments, and if it does work out well for you, let me know. With kind of one season left until Rise to War 2.0 comes out and the whole game meta shifts, I would love to see someone just give Saruman a shot before the meta shifts indefinitely and all the troop and commander builds change indefinitely. But yeah, if you do use him, definitely give me a shout. And if you have enjoyed this video and find it useful, please hit the like button and consider subscribing. I would massively appreciate it. And with that, I really hope to see you on the next one.